Hello, and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm so excited to have you with us today. On this episode, I'm joined by Leigh Ann Woznica, who shares her personal story of undergoing 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization in the hopes of having a biological child with her husband. Today, Leigh Ann warns other women about the problems with IVF. Leigh Ann is also on the board of Lucidity Pictures, which is producing a docuseries entitled Cradled in Glass, which exposes the dark truths of the IVF industry. This is a great episode, and Leigh Ann's story is so moving. I'm excited to share it with you. So without further ado, please welcome Leigh Ann Woznica to Living a Culture of Life. Leigh Ann, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I'm really excited to hear your story today. So when we start today, do you mind just starting by sharing your story with our audience?
Sure, I'd be glad to. My husband and I are significantly separated in age, and I have a biological child that is older, and I chose to go through an elective partial hysterectomy in 2009, and my husband and I met in 2014. And for various reasons, I had this partial hysterectomy, so I still had my ovaries. And he really wanted a biological child when we decided that we wanted children. So we looked at everything. We looked at cadaver uteruses. We looked at everything to try and figure out how we could go about having this biological child. And of course, IVF ended up being the most natural form of birth that we could come up with, which we knew we would have to hire a surrogate to. So we contacted a clinic we were living in Colorado at the time, and we contacted a clinic that had very strict IVF protocols. Went in for a visit, and then we had to go through this 4-hour class. Needless to say, we did not have any live births. We had 4 rounds of IVF, which I don't know anyone else who's done that many rounds of IVF.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just met a woman the other day who did 2 rounds of IVF and ended up with a live birth from her second round. But we did 4 rounds. We lost 8 embryos in our second round. And then in the 4th round, the first and the third round were ended, one due to a medication error and the other due to my follicles weren't growing. We were under a high stress situation with my mother being sick, and my follicles just weren't growing. So in an effort to save me some money, we ended the session early so that I wouldn't go through all the medication. The 4th round was so good that I ended up ovulating during on the day of egg retrieval, because they were an hour and a half late getting me into surgery for egg removal. So all that said, we could have adopted 2 children for the amount of time and money for the amount of money that we spent on IVF, or bought a house even. And we don't have any earthly children, but we have 8 heavenly children today.
Wow. I actually don't know a ton about what IVF looks like from the woman's perspective. Could you just give our audience a little summary of what undergoing IVF actually was?
IVF is very emotional for a number of reasons. The main one being you're taking so many hormones. So your IVF is the woman takes injections multiple times a day. And you have very, very specific, precise times to take those injections. And if you miss that window, you're done. It is extremely rigid and regimented, and it's a very short window. It's 2 weeks. 10 days to 2 weeks is usually how long you're taking the shots. And then they trigger you, which is creating ovulation. And that's a 36-hour window. And so during that time, you're taking anti-ovulation drugs. And so it is just hormones on top of hormones on top of hormones. And it can be incredibly stressful, of course, because you're on all these hormones, but it's also stressful because you don't want to miss that window. Mm-hmm. It's stressful because, everything is elevated, and then it can be very painful. When I ovulated on that 4th round, I was in excruciating pain, worse pain than I was when I was in labor with my daughter, because your ovaries are so engorged.
And is that because they're giving you like hyperstimulant drugs
Well,
or
yeah, you're
hormones?
pushing them to the limit to get them to produce eggs.
Yeah. So, okay, this is just like a dumb question, but when you are undergoing IVF, do you want to ovulate or do you not want to ovulate?
No, you do not want to ovulate. You want the ovulation to happen while you're under, which is only a 10-minute window.
Wow.
They
Well,
literally go in and I guess I don't know if it's called a forced ovulation, but when they go in, they
mhm.
pluck the eggs off the follicles, and that's your ovulation.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely like I knew that women had to take a lot of drugs to undergo it and
Mhm.
that they harvested the eggs, but I didn't know like what the like procedure actually looked like from like the patient perspective.
Right.
When you like started undergoing IVF, like what was your perception of IVF at that time?
Oh, at that time I thought it was beautiful. When we started ovulation, we were in it to make a life, right? We wanted to have a child that was both his and mine. Um, and this was the miracle technology that could create that for us. So we were all for it. I had not done much research and I was relatively new in my Christian faith. I mean, I guess I would say I've always been a believer, but I wasn't always a follower of Christ. So it was really new in that. And so I was starting to do a lot of research into IVF as we were going through this process. And
Mhm.
our process started in 2018, and we did our last cycle in 2020, right in the heart of the COVID lockdown. So that was the timeline, the window, it was October to October is when, so 2 years that it took to do those 4 rounds. And in that 4-year time period, as my faith grew and I learned a lot more about what IVF, the darker side of IVF, at
Mhm.
the end of that fourth round, emotionally and spiritually, I knew we couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah. So was the last round the point where you were just like, I don't want to go through with this anymore? Was
Mhm.
there any moment that made you just like walk away?
Ovulating, walking through all of that and having that final ovulation phase. We discussed doing a fifth round. I was also at an age where getting good quality eggs was going to be a challenge. I was 44 during that last phase.
Mhm.
Um, so I knew that the odds of us having a successful embryo were really low anyway. My husband, who is just amazing and has so much faith that he makes my faith look shameful sometimes, was just like, we can do this. God's going to give us good eggs. But I had gotten to the point where I just couldn't emotionally, I couldn't do it anymore. And it hit him emotionally too, but he's not walking through the hormone craze that I'm going through either. So,
Yeah. What was explained to you when you started undergoing IVF? Like when the IVF clinics were explaining to you what the procedure was going to look like what did they tell you? And then like what terms did they use that would confuse patients?
the first clinic that I went to was a lot more optimistic. The first clinic that I went to was a true IVF clinic. They really just wanted me to do as many cycles as I needed to do to get what I needed. They were relatively honest on statistics, I think, as far as, this is, we want to get as many eggs as we can get because we need to have these viable embryos. And the
Mhm.
more eggs we get, the more quality, the more opportunity we have for a quality embryo. Um, they never said baby. They
Yeah.
never said human life. They use terms like um, uh, chance for life, prospective child, potential for life. Just it was always the possibilities and not life starts at conception, right? So egg fertilizes, you have a life. Nothing like that was ever discussed, and so it made it less. Especially for us having never walked through it and not done tons of research, it made it for us look like it was, this opportunity, but if it didn't work out, it wasn't a big deal, right? Like,
Yeah, it's a little different than we're creating these children. And if they don't
mhm.
survive, it's because they died. It's, oh, we created these embryos that have a potential for life. But if they don't work out, they were just a clump of cells. It's the same kind of language I feel like that you see with abortion.
Yeah, yeah. And even when round 2, when we lost the 8 that we lost, like, we knew that we lost 8 children. I mean, we grieved so hard over that, but we still went ahead and did 2 more rounds because we were so desperate. And so,
Mm.
I that's where I don't want to muddy the water, because I know that there are a lot of people out there who just want a child. And I understand that desperation for a child so much. I really do. But my mission is to help people understand
Mhm.
the other side.
Do you think your story is like emblematic of what most patients who undergo IVF have?
Yes, I do. I do. Most heterosexual couples that go through IVF, I think that in the majority, I think that they're looking for
Mhm.
an answer to an unanswered prayer. Or if they're not faith-based, then they're looking for, an easy way to solve a problem
Mhm.
that there are other options to solve.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the other thing is that you have an industry that doesn't necessarily give women options. Like, obviously, in your case, you didn't have, like, you had the partial hysterectomy, so you weren't able to carry your own child
Mhm.
naturally. But there's so many, like, ways that women who are struggling, like, with fertility, who do have, like, their uterus and their ovaries, like, they can heal whatever's going on. And so there you have an industry that doesn't necessarily tell them about the other options. They just say
Mhm.
IVF is the solution.
Yeah, well, and then we have that same industry that's driving, if you want this specific sex, or,
Mhm.
they have, we had somebody in our little class that we had to do that they wanted a specific sex. And so that's what they were going for. We don't know what their choices were on the embryos that weren't that sex, but that's the whole reason they were there, was to create a specific child. So eugenics 101, right?
Did you see the, New York Times article? It was, like, a couple weeks ago on that topic.
No.
Yeah, the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times, maybe the Washington Post. I kept seeing it coming up on social media, and it was about a clinic that is, like, advertising. It had a little picture of a baby with an arrow, and it was like, "This baby was, like, selected, like, this baby was selected as an embryo," and it was, like, an entire article about how they're using, like, IVF to screen for potential fetal abnormalities or genetic factors that the
Mhm.
parents don't want their child to have, or what gender it is. And it was, like, weirdly jarring. Like, when you know the reality of the IVF industry, I was just like, "Oh, wow, this is so
Right.
sad," but also they're using, like, a heart-wrenching story to try to get it through the door.
Oh, yeah. And that's another thing that's hit me since we started really focusing on IVF, exposing the other side of it.
Mhm.
One of the things that my husband nor myself thought about when we were doing our class was all children, especially if you're having to go through a surrogate, all embryos have to go through that genetic testing. If there's any genetic flaw in that embryo, it's destroyed automatically. They will not implant it in a surrogate. So that was the other part of it. Like, it didn't matter. Our embryos had to be perfect or they would be destroyed.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Also, it's terrible. Like, I mean, obviously, I know there's a lot of problems with IVF, but, like, it's such a, like, clinical way to approach it.
Mhm. Oh, it's totally clinical. I mean, yeah, there's no option for flaw.
Mhm.
But then when you look at the statistics around how many of those perfect embryos actually have live births, it's still crazy.
Mhm. If you could go, like, back in time and talk to your younger self about this process, like, what would you tell her?
I think I would tell her to consider other options.
Mhm.
I mean, the hardest part in my circumstance, and I know I'm not alone, I know there are a lot of women out there who don't have a uterus and can't have a biological child
Mhm.
naturally. And that's the hardest part, is telling someone who is so desperate for a biological child with their husband
Mhm.
that it's not an option, right? And so I would just say, adoption, there are so many little kiddos out there that need to be adopted, so many. And there are tons of embryos out there that need to be adopted. What if we found an embryo that looked like us, I mean, there's all kinds of genetic information on these embryos. Any other There's so many other possibilities. But the more IVF is done, the more lives are created and destroyed. And I think that had I been able to look at it from that perspective in my younger years, I would have never considered it. It just because they make IVF so attractive for people who can't have children naturally or easily. And it just is, it's just sad. It's just really sad.
Yeah. Do you feel like your perception of IVF has changed even more in the years between like when you walked away from doing a 5th round to like now? Like when you decided not to go through, like go forward with it again, were you fully aware of all the problems with IVF, or did you just know enough that you didn't want to keep going?
I knew enough that I didn't want to keep going. I've learned so much more as I have moved into a more pro-life mentality overall, because I'm post-abortive as well. I have learned so much more about the truth of IVF that, I would definitely say that my opinion has radically changed on IVF, because even when we made the decision not to do it again, I still was not totally against it. Like I would have not campaigned against it, for lack of a better word, like I will today.
Yeah. No, that's kind of what I assumed, but I just thought it was interesting. Like, kind of like at what level of knowledge do you need to be able to walk away? Or like, do you have to fully wake up to how bad IVF is? Can you only partially wake up? And it sounds like it was definitely a growing process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the experience of undergoing IVF and losing 8 embryos, like 8 children, has like shaped your perception of personhood?
To some degree, yes. I think as I've learned a lot more about the process of IVF and what that actually looks like versus because, I was so much older, and when I went through health classes in school, I didn't remember all of that about what the embryonic stages are and things like that. And so it just wasn't super clear to me until we lost those babies. And I kept digging that personhood truly started, because they get so excited when you get those fertilized eggs. The clinic was so excited for us. They were like, oh my gosh, you're 40 something years old and you have 8 fertilized eggs. This is amazing. That part of it is very encouraging to someone who's doing IVF. You're like, oh my gosh, we have 8 fertilized eggs. And then as we were waiting for that 6th day to find out if our eggs were actually going to make it, both of us were like, oh my gosh, what if all 8 of these babies make it to blastocyst and then make it through genetic testing? What are we going to do with 8 kids? We just were like, well, we'll figure out a way. God will provide. We'll have 8 babies, but how? There's a lot of afterthought that doesn't go into that person that you're creating when you're creating it, because the excitement is we're creating a life.
That's actually, your comment about how God will provide just raised a question that I have. How much do you think like the Christians understand the reality of IVF? Because our audience is very pro-life. A lot of them know that there's a lot of like ethical issues with IVF, but like what's been your experience?
A lot of Christians go through IVF. A lot. When I shared some comments when I shared some information about Cradled in Glass with my own pastoral group at my church, my own pastoral group was very neutral around it, because so many people within our church have gone through IVF, and they're like, there's so many babies walking around here that are, from IVF. And naturally, I would never say, well, of course, these people should feel guilty because they had a child through IVF. That's not what any of this is about at all. I understand as much as the next person who's done IVF what that desperation feels like and how you would do anything to create a child. But I do believe that, my circumstances are very unique in that I don't have a uterus. So IVF would have been literally the only way we could have had a child biologically. There is no other way unless God miraculously put a uterus in my body again, which, believe me, I prayed for. But there are a lot of people with uteruses who are so quick, so impatient. And to a Christian, I would say, look at Sarah, look at John the Baptist's mom, whose name I can never remember, Elizabeth. Look at them. They were so old when God opened their womb and gave them a child. Is that going to happen today? Maybe not, but we put God in a box because technology has given us permission to do so.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to go to a doctor and say, fix it, instead of praying for it. And I'm not saying that Christians aren't praying for it. I know that they are, but staying patient, you know? And
Well, and not playing God.
Not playing God, exactly. And one of my best friends had her babies through IVF, and her dad begged her not to because she was playing God. So there is a huge lack of knowledge in the Christian community around the dark side of IVF, which is kind of what Cradled in Glass is here for. It's not to push an agenda one way or the other. I don't hide being pro-life and anti-IVF personally, but as for Cradled in Glass, that's not what it's here for. It's not for us we're not trying to make everyone anti-IVF. We just want people to know you need to be informed when you make that decision. And there's a lot of information that is not given in that.
Well, and it sounds like that's coming a little bit from your own experience as well, where you felt like there was things that you weren't told about at the beginning.
Yeah.
You mentioned Cradled in Glass. Could you tell our audience a little bit about what that is?
So Cradled in Glass is a film being produced by a nonprofit company called Lucidity Pictures, for which I am on the board. And it is literally about how embryos are created and frozen in glass. It is a petri dish lab work procedure. It's going to be absolutely incredible. We have 6 episodes. The first 2 episodes are going to be about personal stories, mine of which will be in episode 1. There's going to be an episode on an embryo that was adopted and thawed and live birth from that. There's going to be an episode on a woman who had twins via IVF and still has an embryo frozen. The producer, Savannah Crossfield, is still bringing more opportunities in for stories. We have the medical side of it. We have 2 episodes that are going to be on the medical side of it. So you'll see an actual biopsy being done on an embryo, which my understanding is it's rather shocking. We will learn about the genetics, all the genetic testing that they're doing. We will learn about Dr. Lauren Rubal, who was an IVF doctor and is now a regenerative reproductive doctor. She is doing, she's interviewed on there. We go to an actual cryo clinic where they store the embryos. We have a bioethicist on there who talks about the new technology that they're coming out with, where they're actually crossing stem cells from one embryo to another and creating babies that way, which is just insane. That's where you start looking at Margaret Sanger's eugenics, right? It's just, and this is the problem with science. There's always a dark side. So it may have, ideally, you want to think that IVF was started with the idea of we're going to create life for people who can't create life. But when you look at how long this has been going on, the first successful embryo was created in 1944, but we didn't start seeing babies from them for many years later. So, and then the final 2 episodes are legal. So we have an attorney who is an IVF attorney. She's working on getting on a couple of senators. And so, yeah, it's gonna close out. It's going to open with a bang and close with a bang. We're really excited for it.
That sounds so informative. Just getting like the personal stories and all the information that you need. And definitely a conversation that we need to have right now.
Absolutely. There's nobody talking about it. I mean, it's kind of interesting because I'm starting to see more and more social media comments and posts about IVF and not, oh, I just had my baby from IVF, but IVF is evil. It's really interesting. And I won't say IVF is evil. I don't want any of your listeners who may know someone going through IVF to be like, oh, you've got to listen to this woman. She tells you exactly why you shouldn't do IVF. Do I believe that anyone should do IVF? No. That is my own personal conviction. Do I believe that people who do IVF need to be judged for it? No. I think that there are hurting people out there who just want to find a way. But the most important thing is that we need to be totally informed. There are 1.5 million embryos currently frozen in this country alone that will never see the light of day. And those are all living human beings.
Yeah. The frozen IVF issue is just like, it's so hard to wrap your mind around. It
Mm-hmm.
like, I remember the first time I heard about it, and I feel like I still have the same, like, mental not like a mental wall exactly, but it's just, like, so weird to think that there's so many children in that situation and, like, how do you solve it? Like, I just feel helpless. I think that's how I feel when I think about the frozen embryos is just totally helpless of how can you help those children? What is the solution? What kind of mess have we gotten ourselves into as mankind?
Right.
Yeah.
So here's a fun statistic for you and your audience. We have 1.5 million embryos that are frozen. Of the number of embryos that have been made versus the number of embryos that are frozen, the percentage of live births from created embryos is 7 to 8%. What that means is people are creating far more embryos than they can actually give birth to. So they're just putting them in a freezer or donating them to science. So this is just from the frozen embryos. This isn't the ones that are donated and destroyed. And so that's a heavy number to think about. That's a heavy number.
Yeah. In a way, I think that the whole Alabama court decision last year where they ruled that the frozen embryos were persons and it sparked this whole backlash, like as many other issues that have gone on because of it, I think it was good because it brought this to the conversation, like to the forefront of the conversation. Like people realized that IVF was something actually worth talking about and debating. And it wasn't just this culturally accepted thing that like, oh, IVF is good. You get a baby out of it. And then you have like a small band of pro-lifers who like actually have done enough research to know what's going on, which is like a small percentage of the pro-life groups being like, wait a minute, that's not what's going on here. Like, this isn't just a pro-baby thing, which is what you think of. You think pro-life, pro-baby, you must be pro-IVF. And
Yep.
when you
That's
believe that
exactly
life
right.
begins at conception, it's like, wait a minute, this is a lot darker than you realize.
Well, and now, of course, they're changing what conception is, right?
Yes.
So life no longer begins at fertilization. Conception is now considered actual
implantation. Yeah. No, they did that originally because of hormonal birth control.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to sell hormonal birth control as contraceptives, and contraceptive obviously means against conception. But one of the three methods of like ways that contraception works is by preventing implantation. So two methods are actually like the cervical mucus and preventing ovulation. So those both prevent conception. But the third one, the changing of the lining of the endometrium, actually keeps a already conceived embryo from implanting. So they had to change the definition of conception to sell hormonal birth control as contraception. And then now they're using it still for the IVF as well. So
I did not realize that. You just taught me something new. But can I just tell you, I was so worldly and fleshly for so many years of my life. I did not even realize that most contraception was abortifacient. I had no idea. And I was on birth control for years.
Yeah. Honestly, I grew up pro-life and Catholic. So like pro-life, knew contraception was wrong. Never knew that until I started working here at HLI. And that's like one of the big topics we talk about is like the fact that like, first of all, the like moral problems with contraception and the like relationship issues it causes and how God's plan for sex involves procreation. So like from the theoretical standpoint, but then also just from the like scientific standpoint of it's an abortifacient as well for all hormonal birth control. And I was just like, never knew that. You would have thought that in the world that I grew up in, I would have known that. And so that's why it's something I think is really cool. And I found out when I started working here about the definition changing of contraception. So,
okay.
Anyway, yeah.
Look at us
and it's just
learning
interesting.
together.
It fits here too.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it? Like, what do you hope that people who watch Cradled in Glass and hear your story or who hear your story on the podcast today, like, what do you hope that they take away from hearing it?
You know, if anything, I hope that they take away some aha moment of, okay, I've always believed that IVF was this beautiful scientific creation that, you know, here's what I hear a lot. God made brains. Brains are scientific. Science, that's kind of the Christian argument that I hear. If God didn't want us to have this, it wouldn't have been created. Well, the biggest thing that Satan wants is dead babies, right? And so this is a huge part of that. And so I would just want people to at least take a step back and do more research and keep educating themselves on the backside of IVF, how many embryos make it, how many embryos don't, what are the statistics on thawed embryos making it to implantation, because the reality is that's a low number too. And I don't know that number off the top of my head, or I would tell you. But there are so many pieces of information that are missing for those who go through IVF. So as you've said, your audience is mostly pro-life and anti-IVF. But if they know someone who is really desperate to have that child, I would want them to at least take a step back and look into the reproductive, restorative reproductive, I said regenerative earlier, restorative reproductive medicine. Lots of doctors are starting to really push that. And basically what that is finding the root cause for why you're infertile and healing you, because most people are infertile because of the foods that we eat and the toxins that we're exposed to. It doesn't have anything to do with, medications. It doesn't have, it's a hormone imbalance. And men and women alike are healed and able to have babies this way. And so I would just really want them to look at other options, because we can pray all day for God to open our womb, but we are living in a toxic environment. And in that toxic environment, it creates problems in our reproductive organs that don't allow the womb to do what it's supposed to do. And so I just believe that there are other ways, and at least give the other ways a try. They're so much cheaper. One round of IVF was $11,000 plus the medication, which was $5,000 to $8,000, depending on what our protocol was. And that was in 2018. I don't know what it costs today.
Yeah.
But we spent that 4 times. So imagine paying $3,000 to go through a, reproductive doctor who can actually help you restore your system.
It's so important that women know about those options. I think I told you about this the first time we talked, but we have a missionary in Tanzania, Emil, who does natural family planning training for women in Tanzania and in Africa, but at least in Tanzania, I'm pretty sure for more of Africa, it is super social. It's a social stigma to struggle with infertility. It's your husband can legally divorce you for that's the cause. You can be women will get beaten by their husbands because they can't have children. Women in the community will just ostracize them and you are a terrible woman because you can't have a child kind of attitude. And so women not only they're struggling with the cross of infertility, which not being able to have a biological child for some reason, and they don't know why. And then on top of that, you have this entire social environment where it's added social pressure. And so he'll go and work with women, teach them about their fertility, figure out what's causing their infertility. Often they've been on birth control. So it's helping rebalance your hormones, heal the body. And there's so many joyful stories of women who are finally able to have children. And they're my community finally accepts me. I have this beautiful child. I was infertile for 7 years. And so it does work. I've heard so many stories. That's from Africa, but also just here in America, it's we have so much more access to modern medicine that can also help with that.
Oh yeah.
And so it's there's so many other options if the problem is something hormonal. And why not heal the root problem?
Right.
Even if IVF were moral, why not heal the problem that's actually causing it? And because we know IVF isn't and it kills children, that's so much more reason.
Right. And my question to anyone who's considering IVF is, what would you do if you ended up with 6 or 8 kids? What would you do with all those babies? They're not going to implant more than 2 in most states. So then you have to freeze them. And then thawing them is very, very critical. I mean, if it's not done right, the baby dies.
Yeah. Why do you think Cradled in Glass is so important to release right now in today's modern cultural conversation?
Well, as a conservative Christian, I have to say that I can't necessarily agree with everything that our lovely president is doing. And the expansion of IVF is one of those things that I don't agree with. And most of the pro-life community does not agree with it. And so right now it is super critical, because if our taxpayer and insurance dollars are going to be paying for IVF, people need to understand the risks and the side effects and the loss of life that happens with IVF, so they can make a more educated and informed decision. Because we are going to see a lot of babies created that are just put in a freezer. And what happens when we run out of storage? What happens when one of those freezer facilities has to close down because they can't afford to stay open because people don't want to pay the bill to keep their babies on ice? There's a lot of things that have to be considered when it comes to IVF.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, if you know the truth shall set you free.
Yes.
Like I know that your documentary is definitely trying to approach it from like not the religious perspective, but just like,
Correct.
Here's facts and ethics. And to start by educating modern society on the science and the facts of what goes on, that's going to be a good headway to like get people like start questioning the IVF industry.
Absolutely. And so, yes, we don't talk about religion at all in the docuseries, but we definitely show you the cold, hard truth about IVF.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is what's your favorite story on the documentary, but like just broader than that? Like, what do you think is the most important takeaway or the thing that kind of like stood out to you the most from the docuseries?
Personally, I think it's going to be, for me personally, it's going to be the scientific side of it. I'm a very analytical brain. And so I think the science is going to be the thing, because that's really where my mind started to change. As I learned more about the science, that's where my mind changed. So I think the bioethicist conversation, I think the biopsy episode is where people's minds are going to be like, oh my gosh, that little embryo has to get poked and prodded by that. You know what I mean? It's just going to open a lot of eyes.
Yeah. No, and it's like we were saying, it's so important for people to know about this and to have like, even if you're pro-life and anti-IVF already, have all those tools in your back pocket so that when you're in a conversation, you can say, hey, these are the stats, or like, did you know this is what happens? Because you could be like me, where I'm ignorant of what the process even like looked like. If you're on the woman's perspective.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
How does Cradled in Glass inform people who might be considering IVF? Like, what do you want people who watch the docuseries who are considering undergoing it? Like, what do you want them to know?
Realistically, I think seeing the stories of the people who have gone through it, and I love that the stories are success, non-success, and adoption. I think that seeing all of that will help people make a more educated decision. Again, the scientific pieces of it, I think, are going to change a lot of minds, especially if they're Christian. And already have that pro-life mentality. I think it's going to change a lot of minds. I think when they see the cryobank that we got to go into, and they see the number of embryos that are frozen in that one cryobank, it's going to open a lot of eyes. So again, it's informed consent. If you are walking into an IVF clinic and they're telling you that they're going to help you create a baby and you're going to have the potential for life, and that, you know, here's your statistics, but the statistics are always pushed a little higher than they really are. And that, you know, that is the one thing, because they're going to tell you in an IVF clinic what the chances of a baby implantation and it working out. They're going to tell you what those statistics look like based on one embryo, not based on the 5 embryos that you make outside of the one that they implant and that you're going to freeze. So it's, you know, I think that's where it's going to really bring some informed consent. And that's the idea. You know, people are going to make the decisions that they want to make. And we're not here, again, like I said, we're not here to judge. We're not here to, you know, condemn. We really just want people to know the truth, because the truth is not told.
Yeah. No, informing people is so important. And also just, I think our audience already knows this, but like to keep in mind that any children who have been created through IVF are still children of God. Like not like I think our audience is going to go and judge all those children who are conceived that way by any means, but just like I think that's also an important thing to kind of bring to the conversation of like, you can at the same time hold that you think IVF is wrong and immoral and should be eradicated, while at the same time welcoming children who are conceived that way as like, you are human, you're a child of God, you're beloved, like no matter the circumstances of your conception, like you are loved by God. And I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Yes, I think that's very important to bring up, because I, again, know plenty of people who were who had children via IVF. I probably have many friends who were born via IVF, and either they don't know or they've never shared that with me. But it is very important that we love all of those people, no matter what.
Exactly. Well, Leigh Ann, when is the documentary or docuseries going to come out?
It is scheduled to go through post-production at the end of the summer. We're going to hit all of the screening film festivals, and then hopefully it will be out by the beginning of next summer.
Fun. So
for public
summer
view.
of 2026.
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then where can people go to find out more information about this?
LucidityPictures.com. The producer writes a blog every single Friday, and they're always super fun, great pictures, all kinds of information on what's going on the film shoots, and then a lot of the behind the scenes, and then just some information on what's going on in the IVF world today to kind of keep people informed on the laws that are happening and our administration and all that fun stuff. So I would definitely suggest that you go over there to sign up for the emails because she's a great writer.
Yeah. And I'll put that in the description as well, the website, so people can check it out. And do you have any last thoughts for our audience today?
I just want to share with everyone how grateful that I am to have gotten to be on this show, and that I love that all of your people are pro-life and anti-IVF. But if anyone that you know could use this information, just share it with them, and just know that we at Lucidity Pictures love each and every human being on this planet, frozen or not.
Yeah. Well, Leigh Ann, thank you so much for being on the show today. I've loved this conversation. I've loved hearing your story, and I'm really excited to see the documentary when it comes out.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And to all of our audience, please like and subscribe. Check out the new ebook that we have coming out. I'll put it on the end screen, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.